Welcome to Thriving in Construction, where we share insights, inspire growth, and break down barriers in the construction industry. What does it take to lead infrastructure projects that impact millions of people, while guiding teams, managing risk, and delivering results that serve communities for decades? Today's conversation is with someone who has spent more than 3 decades doing exactly that. Lisa Metheney dedicated 32 years of her career to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where she ultimately served as the Deputy District Director for Programs and Project Management in the Charleston District. Throughout that time, she helped guide major infrastructure initiatives, military construction projects, emergency response operations, and complex programs that support both communities and national missions. But what makes Lisa's journey special, especially meaningful, is the leadership perspective she brings. The ability to navigate complexity, build strong teams, and deliver solutions that stand the test of time. In this conversation, we talk about her career, the lessons she learned leading major programs, and what it truly means to lead with purpose in the world of engineering and construction. Let's get into this conversation with Lisa Metheney. Well, Lisa Metheney, oh my gosh, you are in the Thriving in Construction, the podcast. I am so grateful for the opportunity of your presence in this podcast, for you to take the time to be with us. You are, to me, one of the luminaries of the Army Corps of Engineers, and such a leader, so humble and so smart, that I told you when you retired, can you mentor me, please? Can you mentor people in my company? Because you are absolutely spectacular. What you have been able to create in the 32 years at the Army Corps of Engineers, the leadership that you created, the team, and how everyone talks about you when you are there and behind you. I have witnessed, I can see it, it's no joke, and I can only hope that so many people in the construction industry, business owners, can replicate or learn from somebody like you, because you are the real deal. I'm so proud of you. How are you?
Well, thank you. Thank you for those kind words. It is great to see you again. I am enjoying retirement. It's also an adjustment, but I am enjoying getting to do some travel and do some reading. But I'll be honest, I still follow a bunch of core districts on social media so I can see what they're doing, especially Caribbean District and Charleston District. Because I fell in love with the island of Puerto Rico, and so I'm always curious what we're doing down there. So I still peek in, but I'm doing well and enjoying retirement.
Well, I learned the other day that retirement is not retirement, it's recalibrating. That there's an option.
Oh, I like that term, recalibrating.
Yeah,
that's what I'm doing.
Recalibrating, we have, until we're alive, there's so much more for us, and we can recreate ourselves in different directions. So I'm sure you're in your way, in your journey, and it's hard. Like we were saying before I start with all the interviews. So anybody that transition from, let's say it's a mother, and the kids leave the house, that is a change. And sometimes we do it better than others. So I'm sure you do amazing, and you'll continue to impact because it's who you are. So I'm excited for the forum, that the people that will hear this interview with you, and the other ones that we will create.
Well, great. Like I said, I'm happy to be here. I'm flattered that you asked me to do it. So I am yours to ask all the questions you've got.
So Lisa, 3 decades in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. an incredible journey, like I said. Take us back from the beginnings. How do you get to the Army Corps of Engineers? And how do you get to the position that you last held and the impact more than anything? Because you can have a job, you didn't have a job. You had an identity with the mission of the Army Corps of Engineers, making it happen. You were a soldier, not in combat, but support. How do you do it? How do you go from where you started to where you ended?
Well, it was, as in a lot of things that happen, sometimes you just bump into things. I was finishing my first year of grad school with my MBA, and I was looking for a summer job, and one of my favorite professors in the econ department, where I was working part time, he said, "Oh, you should go down to the they're hiring summer interns." He was doing some work for the Corps then, and so he said, you should go check it out. And so I did. And at the time, the only thing I knew about the Corps of Engineers was that where I grew up kind of in the middle of three Corps of Engineers lakes in West Virginia. So that's all I knew about the Corps then. So I went down and applied and got a job as an economist assistant in their planning department. And I fell in love with the mission. I love the work. I love the big projects. And the thing that really captured me was it was doing impactful projects for a lot of small communities that really needed our assistance, needed help in order to protect them from floods or all the various things that we were doing. When I was in Huntington District, I did a lot of flood damage reduction work. And so that's what really drew me to the mission. And then, so I was there. I started off as an economics assistant because I had a business degree. They had me do a lot of the like budgeting work, operating budgeting work, and things like that. So I got to learn about how all the money works in the agency. And my first supervisor, Ben Borda, was amazing. And we've talked before that leadership matters, and Ben was a great supervisor, and he was a great leader, and would let you try things out, would push you a little bit to say, hey, won't you go try this out? I think you'd be good at it. And so when I finished my MBA, they hired me full time, and so I did economics work, and then I did plan formulation work. And then I did a little bit of project management there. There was an opening down in the Charleston district for a position similar to what I was in Huntington. And so I applied for it, came down to Charleston district. At the time, I thought I'd be in Charleston for about 6 years. And then I was going to, thinking about, oh, maybe I'll go out to Pacific Northwest and learn about the hydropower mission and that sort of stuff. And I really liked the mission Charleston District did. And then again, we had my predecessor as DPM, Bill Stein. He had a big vision for the district. And so as the district grew and added missions, we added a military mission, we got that back. And so I love doing all that. And I moved over into the programs arena because, again, I understood the money and I understood project management. And that's a lot of what programs is. And so then I just kept working away, and I love to, and still do love learning new things and trying new things, and so I was in positions that allowed me to do that. And so then when Bill retired, I became the DPM, and so I did that for 11 years before I retired. But it has the Corps was very good to me. I worked on a ton of different projects in a ton of different places, including Europe District. And I met so many wonderful people in the Corps. That the Corps it was very good to me. But I never went to college going, oh, I'm going to go work for the Corps of Engineers or anything like that. It's literally something I bumped into and fell in love.
It's what I would call divinely guided.
Yeah, there are some people that have said that. Yes.
You probably Yeah, it wasn't in your agenda, but it happened. And I think probably your work ethics and your passion to serve and create impact for so many communities that were underserved was really the gasoline behind every action that you took.
Yeah, I come from my whole family is a public service family. My sister, my mom, my dad, my stepmom, we're all been public servants. And excuse me. And so that was always just a big part of our life in general. And so this was a great fit for that.
Yeah, it's who you are. So obviously you didn't foresee when you were in college that you were going to belong to such a large organization and creating so much impact. But it kind of maybe your spirit drew you to that. The lineage of
Yes.
your whole family. Wow. So how many professionals were you supervising towards the end, the last 10 years at the Army Corps of
Yeah.
Engineers?
Yeah, at the peak when I was DPM, we had about 280 employees, and our dollar value fluctuated because it depends on what projects get funded by Congress. But on average, it was around 350, 375 million. But when we were doing the harbor deepening, it was as high as 750, $800 million. And then a lot of that work was here in South Carolina, but we have in our IIS mission, we had customers all across the U.S. And so we did work all across the U.S. So having to be aware of time zones and getting to work with sister districts because they would be our construction oversight, and sometimes we'd have their team members on our PDTs, and so really getting to know and understand those other districts. So a lot to learn and be aware of every day.
So for the people that are listening to us, that they are not familiar with what's a district, how the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is organized across the U.S. and outside of the U.S., can you give a brief explanation on what a district is?
Yes. So I tell everybody my big intro for the Corps when I used to do speaking engagements was the Corps is like Visa. We're everywhere you want to be in 3 places you probably don't. But the Corps of Engineers has, I think, currently still 43 districts worldwide. And you can think of a district as being the office that's responsible for on the ground work. And all of those offices, they vary in size. They're laid out geographically according to river basins. And so it's not by state or anything like that. So some districts are very small, like Charleston District, Chicago District, Buffalo District. And some of them are very large, like Fort Worth or Baltimore or Sacramento. But the district office, it's run by either a lieutenant colonel or a colonel, and then a senior civilian like myself. And that district is responsible for all the projects kind of in their geographic area. And then, obviously, just like everybody has a boss, the districts report to a division. There's 8 divisions. And then ultimately, everybody reports to the chief of engineers in Washington, D.C.
Perfect. And you were at the Charleston district?
Correct.
Right. And I just came back from the Caribbean district, which was newly created for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And
yes,
that was newly created. Can you explain what was the reasoning behind creating that district? I know it was handled before by Charleston, some of the work, and some of the work by Jacksonville. How do you decide to create a district?
So, geographically, the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico were all part of Jacksonville's geography, if you will. But we at the Charleston district were on the island because our customer, the 81st Readiness Division of the Army Reserves, has facilities there that we renovated or maintained or whatever. So that's why we were on the island. And you know, different districts occasionally might have been down there. Uh, with the explosion of work that became funded and available on Puerto Rico, especially after you know, all of the big hurricanes. Um, there was also a huge amount of work in the state of Florida for very similar reasons. And so it became so large um, for Jacksonville to handle by themselves. And with, you know, with commuting to the island, and then also just the different nature of doing work on an island. You know, we've got a district in Hawaii, and they'll tell you working in an island environment is different than working in a mainland environment. And so so we had a division general at the time who put together a tiger team to look at, you know, what do we need to do to make sure that we're advancing projects in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and that we're giving the same level of attention and focus to that area as we are to Florida and Georgia and South Carolina. And so the team really looked at the workload and the needs and the things like that. And that's how the Caribbean district came into being, was as a result of that. And I think I know it was a big change for folks in the Jacksonville district, and for other people, but I do think that it has been very helpful for the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands to have that district there really, you know, focused on them and their needs. But that's how that came into being. And the Caribbean district, they are great to work with. They understand Charleston district's role with the Army Reserves there. Mary Carmen helps oversee some of our projects there. And so
she's amazing
very,
too.
Yeah, she is a powerhouse.
We were in a project with her
Carmen
also, and she's a powerhouse for sure.
Yes, I love, she is straightforward and no nonsense. And that, I mean, when you're in construction, that's what you need. Like you need someone who's just going to, you know, communicate and tell you what's what. And so yeah, I loved working with Jackie Kaiser. She's their DPM. She's great. She and I had worked on a lot of different things together across our career, and so her becoming the DPM there, we really got to collaborate on a lot of different things as that district was sort of stood up and you know, got their sea legs under them, so to speak.
So since you have mentioned a few women, and next week we're celebrating the women in women and women in construction, women in any industry, but
well, it is Women's History Month, so we get to celebrate all month long.
almost. We're celebrating already. So that I ask you, in the 32 years of experience that you have, how did you see the mix between men and women in the Army Corps? You know, in the environment that you worked at in back then and now. What's the change? Because you have mentioned very powerful women that I know and are super committed. And they actually lead still with a feminine energy. They know very well how to use the masculine energy, the feminine energy. When they have to be assertive, they are assertive. But when they have to play and they have to smile, they do that too. So how do you see the difference in numbers?
So I, like, when I first came to work for the Corps in 1993, even though we had you know, women in engineering, we had some women in construction, in the actual construction arena, but we had very few in project management at the time when I first came to work at the Corps. But over time, I kind of saw a shift in that. You saw more women coming into engineering, more women coming into project management. More women coming into construction, although not quite as quickly as in some of the other fields. And so that perspective, I did see a shift. And part of that I think was a result of more women getting into STEM fields in college and pursuing STEM fields than had in the past. But I also think some of it was intentional from other leaders, looking out and helping to sort of make sure that the door was open to everyone. I mean, I mentioned my first supervisor, Ben Borden. Ben was very good about looking at people and saying, I think you need to go try this. I think you have skills for this, or it will help you develop skills. And a lot of times, and particularly in that era, if somebody didn't champion some of the female employees, it might not be something they would think to get into. And so I think there was some deliberateness by some leaders at that time to really help make sure the door was open. And I think, that's been one of I think the biggest misconceptions about DEI and some other things is it's this, oh, well, we want this pie chart that's got, you know, 33% women and 28% men and 15% Hispanic or whatever. But it's not about developing a pie chart. It's not about, counting noses. It's about making sure that everybody that has the skills to do a particular job, it has access to that job. And so, that's sometimes that's when you need a champion. And men need champions as well. Not everybody feels comfortable, walking into a room, like you and I do, walking into a room, introducing yourself, talking to people. And so, it's all about making sure that you can cast the widest net and then pick the best person for the job.
Yeah.
And so I think that was part of that deliberateness in the Corps. And during my time in the Corps, we got to see our first female general lead one of the divisions, Margaret Bertram. We got to have our first female commander in the Charleston district while I was there. That was Rachel Hondard. At the same time that Diana Holland was the commander of South Atlantic Division. And so, you could see these changes over time. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head, because it's not about color, it's not about race, or Hispanic or whatever. It's just having a leader that is acting as a mentor and giving people the opportunities that they need, and just because of I guess what they have in their brain, being able to be zoned into what gives. Everybody has a gift. Everyone
Yep.
has a value, and how can we make it better, right? How can we pour more into that person, and that everybody has a unique ability, and how can we as leaders find that and put the person where they can flourish and their zone
Yes.
of genius, as somebody would say. Well, you mentioned so many names. I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to bring them here. Because that's a gift, being able to do that. And you also, when you talk, the story that sometimes I hear some people have in their heads, oh, this is a male dominator, whatever. Nobody stops you. If you want to get something, nobody stops you. Yes, you just said it. We have to have somebody sometimes that is watching, opening the door. But that can be available. You had those mentors along your journey. And what
Yes.
do you think made them see you?
Well, as my mom said when I was 6 years old, because I was just bossy. But I think I think for me personally, and it's different with every person, right? But I think for me personally, my parents had always been very good about talking. There weren't boy jobs and girl jobs, right? There were just jobs. And whatever you did, you would always, their expectation was you did it to the best of your ability. Now, you may not be able to do it as well as the next person, but you did it the best you can, but there wasn't any real division there. So for me, if there was something I wanted to work on or something I was interested in, I would just go either ask about it or read up on it. I asked a million questions. I think probably my first 2 years in the Corps of Engineers, if they kept track, it had to be over a million questions. And so I think folks saw that as you know
Positive.
potential for leadership in the future, because that's what that's what you spend a lot of your time as a leader doing, right? Asking questions, figuring things out, solving problems. And so I think just by naturally how I approach things, that was something that they saw. um I think as leaders, it's very important that we spend some of our time not looking at a problem or a project, but looking at the people doing the thing, and really helping folks, like you said, find those gifts, pair those people up. And because sometimes you talked about being in a male dominated field or a female dominated field. Well, if you're a female coming into a male dominated field, sometimes you're really going to shine because you may approach the project or the problem completely different than everybody else who's tackled it. And so you're going to shine, not so much because you're a woman, but just because you came in and approached it differently and were successful. And that door swings both ways. And so, but yeah, I think for me it was just, I guess you could say it was naivete. I just didn't know that I wasn't allowed to do stuff, so I just went and did it.
I'm totally with you. And when you're giving clarity, clarity is power. When you're understanding the mission and you're translating this to the hundreds of people that are under your leadership, how do you get to take the mission of the Army Corps of Engineers, which is no joke, right? Because their mission they're protecting the US, right? National security. I mean, I remember when I first walked into a base, when we drove into a base. I didn't walk, I drove into a base. And it was so impressive for me coming from Dominican Republic. I'm like, I had so much respect for the structure, the rigidity, the security, it's like the control, but so much respect for, I could see where I went to NASA the first time to what they do, but also I felt honored that we had been selected to be part of that mission, not in the war or fighting, but supporting the infrastructure. I think sometimes we don't understand, if we are external to DoD, what's the mission. But it's so important for us that are consultants or contractors, as well as for people in the ground, employees. So how do you, as a leader, make sure that you stay on mission, that when things get confused, you go back to the mission. The mission is the guiding force, the values that you stand for. How do you make sure that that happens? Can you give an example of a situation?
Yeah, I'll try to come up with a good brief example, but to your first point of the question, one of the things I always tried to do is I tried to make sure that everybody working on a project, but specifically that project manager, and then the division chiefs, always knew this is who this project is serving. Because it's real easy to think, oh, it's just another barracks project, right? Well, no, at Fort Jackson, when the Corps of Engineers does a barracks project, that is a barracks where an entry-level soldier is going to stay for his first introduction into the Army. And it's where he's going to come to at the end of the day when he's exhausted. It's where he's going to meet his fellow soldiers and build friendships, and it has to be up to snuff. because his job when he's there is training. And we don't need him thinking about, oh, this barracks is drafty, or this doesn't work, or it's laid out poorly, or, whatever. The best compliment that anybody at Fort Jackson can ever have, as far as I'm concerned, for a facility is they never think about it, because it exists and does its job because we did our job. And so I would always try to break those big projects down into like that one very specific thing that everybody on the team could think about, and then really reinforce that with the project manager. Because anytime you have a project team meeting, it's very easy to get lost in the weeds and get wrapped around, oh, well, the brick delivery's late, or the concrete's not up to snuff, or whatever. And yes, our goal is to finish on time and on budget, but our goal is also to provide that quality product to that 18-year-old who it may be his first time away from home, and he needs a place to stay. And so like that's how I would try to break it down. When we would do work for the VA, I would also say, look guys, the VA needs our help. If not us, then we want them taking care of our veterans. We don't need them worrying about a leaking roof, or how do I put this addition on. We don't need them doing that. We need them focusing on hiring the absolute best doctors and nurses and technicians to take care of those veterans. And so that was our mission. If we do our mission right, then finishing on time and on budget and all of that stuff should fall into place. But our mission is the service to those individuals. And so I think that's one of the ways to kind of keep people mission focused. And it's also a great touch point for, things. It's construction. Things are going to go sideways all the time in construction. It's the nature of the beast. But when those times happen, like, what's the touchstone for everybody? It's like, okay, wait a minute. How do we get this barracks back the way it needs to be? All right, yes, the bricks are late. Hey, can you call Fred and see what you can do? Because at the end of the day, come the 30th of this month, I got an 18-year-old soldier that's got to move in this building. So come on, team, how do we do it? And so I think that's the way you help keep people on mission.
So what I hear, that we know we have to finish on time, on budget, and all that, and stuff is going to happen. But how do we get back on track? I hear reasons come first, answers come second. So you gave clarity on the why. Why are we here? What's the real why we are? And it's the end user that is going to live in this facility. Otherwise, they wouldn't even need any of us.
Right.
So we have that clarity, that empathy for the end user, most likely we will all find ways to solve a problem faster than if we didn't.
Yes, I agree with that.
So, okay, well, I saw the strategic plan for the Caribbean District, for example, and resilience is a big deal. Not only in the Caribbean District, but also at the core level. When they talk resilience, what are they talking about?
Well, resilience is a word that gets tossed out there to, and it has different meanings to different people, and depending on the context can mean different things. From a project standpoint, we want projects that will last and that will stand up to changes. A lot of times you'll hear resilience then from a climate perspective. But if you think about it, from a building perspective, we want a building that will, stand up to weather, but will also stand up to time, and that the HVAC is going to, keep doing its thing during its expected life. It's not going to crap out, 10% in. And it's a building that if there are changes in laws and regulations, that you can go in and hopefully easily make those adaptations, right? And so that's, especially when we think about things in the Caribbean, Mother Nature is a huge driver of what happens down there, right? And so you want what we're doing to be able to work with Mother Nature as best we can. We also talk a lot in the core, when I was there, about the resilience of staff, and helping make sure that your employees are resilient, meaning that the work that we do can be very stressful, and it's a very public mission, and we get a lot of public scrutiny, as we should. We spend tax dollars, but making sure that you're taking care of your staff, that they're not overworked, that they're able to have a work life balance, so that when they are at work, they are rested and ready to go, and they're not worried about, oh, is my boss going to make me stay 6 hours late today, and my kid's got a baseball game or whatever. And supplying our employees with the tools they need, to have some of that, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's health and wellness, whatever those things are, but making that available, so that you can have a resilient staff, because a resilient staff is going to work better together, and they're going to provide better execution and better delivery. So it's we're resilient in the what we provide, but we need to help provide resilience to the people who provide it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I hear you. And when I hear you, I also hear culture. How do we create a culture that allows this, right? That the team can flow, where one person assists the other person when there is a challenge internally in their family. Like, we're all together, kind of, we're in this world together. It's all of our mission. And what's culture for you? Because I know, and I've experienced this myself in my company. I know what a toxic culture is, and I know what a flowing culture, a culture of excellence, a culture that can execute. People are happy. People are all rowing in the same direction, going in, all rowing together. What's the value of culture in leadership, and who's responsible for culture?
So that's a great question. Who's responsible for culture? The short answer is everyone's responsible for culture, but I believe that it starts at the top down, and that so executive leaders, or your senior leaders, they have to talk the talk and walk the walk, and then they have to then instill that in their managers, and then as you talk to your project managers, you need to instill that in them so that they can have that within the team. And so it's everybody's responsibility to kind of work in that, but it's driven from the top down. To me, culture is important, because at the end of the day, you get better stuff. And when I talk to leadership development groups and things, I tell them all the time that leadership is not about making your life easier in the here and now. Leadership is about making other people's lives easier so that they can deliver and execute the program. And so one of my personal philosophies was, when it's mission neutral, when there's something that's needed and it's mission neutral, I would always try to side with flexibility for the employee. Now, sometimes that would make my life more difficult. And so I might have to stay a little extra, or I might have to do things a way that I don't normally like to. But because I provided that flexibility to those employees, they're much willing to go the extra mile. They're very loyal to the agency,
Organization.
And I used to joke when I would talk to my fellow DPMs, because they would talk a lot about the different things that we would do in Charleston District, and how do you find time to do all that, and why do you even bother sending out birthday cards to people on your staff, or whatever. And I would tell them, I said, well, let's have a little test. Friday afternoon at 5:15. I will give you the roster of my entire district, and you pick 5 names at random. Don't care who they are. I guarantee you, you can call any of those 5 names you pick, and I can call them at 5:15 on a Friday and say, I'm really sorry to bother you. I wouldn't bother if it wasn't important, but I need help on fill in the blank. And 99 times out of 100, those folks are going to be like, yep, give me just a minute. I'll call you back. Maybe I had to pick up the kid or whatever, but they'll do it. But they did that because, on the time that they needed, like, hey, can we really move this review date? My kids got their recital that day. Well, it's easy for me to go, no, sorry. This day works better for me. But if it's mission neutral, yes, okay, we can move it a day, go see your kid's recital. And so, by doing that, that's a culture of where people feel valued. And when people feel valued, they perform better. It's the same way you set up the culture of when people bring you a problem and they say, hey, boss, I messed this up. I was supposed to send out these invitations and they didn't go out, or, oh, I dropped a decimal and we actually needed, $10,000 and not $1,000. Of not, not whipping them down on the carpet or anything like that, but saying, okay, well, let's talk about how do we fix it first. Then the next thing is, how are we not going to let this happen again? And it's not that doesn't mean there's no accountability, right? There will be accountability, and that's what performance reviews are for and those sorts of things. But setting it up where people are not afraid to bring forward a mistake, or they're not so afraid of making a mistake that they just overthink themselves. And as a leader and leader of leaders, like, that's what we have to instill to make the culture work. And then everybody in the organization is responsible as we bring in new people, helping the new people who come in understand what the culture is. Particularly if you bring in folks that come from a culture that's a little bit more toxic, and like, hey, no, I'm sorry, we don't talk to people like that here. Like, you might have done that in your old organization, but we don't do that. And so that's, when I say culture is everybody's responsibility, that it's in those areas where it's everybody's responsibility, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you and with everything you said about culture. And it's like you can put the finger on it. It's not objective. It's like a force that it's there, but it's not. It's the way of behaving of a group of humans. That's what culture is. Whether it's a country, a family, a business organization, and you can see it. People that are not in the organization can notice the behavior. And so, but I agree, it starts with emulating with the leadership, their own example. It's like in a house, right? Your parents, if you don't want your kids to lie, don't lie. They are observing every move you make, observing completely. So we want to be accountable too. And we have to be accountable. It needs to develop that trust that you're talking about.
Yeah, and one of the biggest parts of that is communication, clear and transparent communication, and transparent doesn't mean you tell everybody everything all the time, right? Because some things are not for everybody to know, but it means that you tell what you can as soon as you know it, particularly if it's bad information, and you communicate when you don't know something, because in the absence of information, people will make up information. And so as a leader, being transparent in your communication and communicating, early and often, as they like to say, that helps build that culture. It helps build that trust. It's part of the glue that holds it all together, right? It's not any one thing. And I think that's something that a lot of times as leaders move up in rank, they're like, oh, well, this is all executive information now, and so I can't share any of it. Well, maybe you don't share all of it, but you can synthesize it and say, hey, I know you guys have heard there's a new law that's being debated. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. When we know how it's going to affect us, we'll let you know. and then actually following through and doing that. That helps bring the angst way down, because again, the easier the life is for our employees, the better they're going to perform. And when they perform better, that's how we meet all of those execution goals, right? Now, it doesn't mean that, occasionally you don't have to put everybody in a room and knock people's heads together and say, hey, come on, guys, we're 20% behind, let's go on. But to the maximum extent practicable, you give people an environment where they're comfortable and they can thrive, and they will deliver for you over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I really believe there's a distinct culture even among the different districts. You can notice the difference.
Oh,
and
yeah.
from entity to another entity, because as a construction company, we've worked with multiple entities. There's entities that I totally don't want to work for. There's clients that I fire because we don't align with how they see the world. And we definitely don't want to put our employees through that. And so that being able to have that distinction when you start as a company, you don't know because I don't know, you're inexperienced. But I compare the selection of a client and the interaction, communication of a client to a marriage very often. Because if you select that person, your spouse, erroneously, it could represent catastrophe. So, and we're going to leave that there. But learning how to select, how to interact, how to communicate. Go back to communication. You're absolutely right. The communication that we have in our heads, the communication that we have with other people, and really communicating the bad news early. But for that, we have to have that level of trust that people don't think they're going to get fired, that they are going to be, because people make mistakes, right? And how do we not do it again? How do we learn and create a different pattern? And understanding that failure is part of life, because look, as good as we could be, we're gonna fail. But how do we prevent ourselves from failing? If we can, what can we do from not making a mistake? And there's processes and procedures, and that's also developed by the practice of this happened. How do we not do it again? And documenting it, right? Sometimes small businesses, we're not that good at doing that.
And again, I'll go back to something we talked about before, is the documenting it is good and important. The learning the lesson is the most important thing. The talking about it to learn the lesson, I would say, is the next most important thing. And then the third most important thing is documenting. Because if you document it, but you never learn your lesson, well, then all you do is waste paper. But I think always having that discussion, good or bad at the end of a project, doing that, you can use the fancy Army after action review term if you want, but sitting down and just doing what went well, what could have gone better, and how do we keep what went well, and how do we improve the stuff that could have gone better, and just having that discussion and letting people feel empowered and safe enough to say, hey, this is the third time that this hasn't gone well. And so from the construction field folks, hey, engineering, if you all could just do this thing on the drawings, right? We really think that would help us. But they got to feel comfortable enough to say that. And the other direction for engineering to go, hey, construction, could you not just please read the footnotes before you decide to fix something in the field? It's in the footnotes. But having that conversation and it not being adversarial or anything like that. And so if that is part of your regular recurring theme of every project, not just the projects that, there's always that one that goes to hell in a handcart, right? But not just those, but on all projects. And, it doesn't have to be a day-long thing or, super, super time consuming, but really talking about for each and every project, how did it go? What did we learn? And I think that's a very important thing. And as leaders, that's what we need to remind people of, and sometimes task people to do. And that's how we all get better together.
So that brings me to another question. For the partners that you look for, the contractors that come to work with you hand in hand to make the mission, and how do you instill in them that culture of tell me earlier, right? And how when something goes bad and you have a bad CPARS, performance evaluation, which is crucial for you for continuation of work, what can be done? Because sometimes the best lessons are those you can create different patterns, different processes, recreate yourself, but the ego plays a role because you feel emotionally that you fail. So this if you can focus on contractors that become your partners, how do we do it better? How do we partner with you? How do we adopt the culture?
So yeah, so I'll tell you from my perspective when I was there, and obviously those that are currently doing the job are the most, they have the most up to date viewpoint on this, right? But a lot of it comes back to just how do you have good teams work together, and it's a lot of the things we've already talked about. Communication, not just one way, and don't write me a letter every time. Pick up the phone and call and ask. Before you head off down the thing, and call and ask, because it could be just a very simple misunderstanding of a single word, right? And instead of having 3 letters campaign, it could have been solved in 10 minutes. So I think communication is a big thing. I think for the core, it's very important for the core representatives to explain kind of the why, like we talked about before. Like, what is the real mission of building this facility, right? And really explaining why it's important, why the schedule is what the schedule is, and why it's important that certain things not deviate from that. So I think that's a big deal from the core. I think from the contractor's perspective, they also need to talk about, hey, yes, we put in the winning bid, and everything in our bid was factual, it's factual and correct. But we just want to let you know, here are some things we're seeing in the industry that we don't think is going to be a problem, but if there is going to be a problem, it's going to be in getting concrete trucks, because right now there's a problem with imports on fill in the blank, and just going ahead and being very upfront about that. Like, that's the spirit of teamwork and partnership. It's not a gotcha game. It's not a, oh, well, I'm going to wait, and then if the trucks don't show up, I'm going to say, no, not my fault. Because there might be somebody else on the government team that says, oh, wait a minute, I know a guy, because when this happened in Albuquerque district, this is what they did. So let me call him, and maybe we can put some things in place to help reduce that risk. And so it's really being, again, transparent about what some of those risks are. I mean, the government knows that you guys need to make a profit. We all know that. And we also, as the government, try very hard not to make it to where, one mistake and you're going to lose your whole company, right? But part of the way for us to work on that is to work on it as a team. We need to understand the environment you're in. You need to understand the environment we're in. I think asking questions and really reading through all the documents that the government gives you, and reading for them for clarity, not reading through them going, oh yeah, I know what that means, and I'm going to skip the next 5 pages, because in there sometimes there's different things. And so really reading and understanding that. But I think the biggest thing is it's that true teamwork partnership. It's not the, I'm only going to communicate when the contract says I have to. I'm only going to tell you about a problem after it's happened and I've taken 3 weeks and can't solve it, and now I'm 2 weeks behind or whatever. That is the best way to partner from my perspective. And that's, when I was the DPM, that's something I always, again, tried to instill, is that this is a team. Now, sometimes it has to be us versus them, either contractually or legally or whatever. But for as much as we can, we are a team, and we will succeed or fail as a team.
Absolutely. I think you're right on. And that takes me to another question. If you wanted to see, if you had a magic wand and you wanted to see a construction industry, and I know for me, construction, and for the listeners, sometimes architects and engineers, but we're all together. We're not separated. We all are a team. What needs to happen to elevate our industry, get to the next level where we're really we create that culture throughout the industry? And it's not a culture of you did it, I did it. It's so argumentative. And we're more problem solvers, more trust, and more communication. What needs to happen?
Gosh, that's a hard question. I think, I think there needs to be more discussions about that. I mean, if you think about, a lot of times at the various industry days, regardless of who's hosting it, whether it's AGC, SAME, individual, whatever, a lot of time it's very, very focused on, here's all the projects I have coming up, and here's when the bids are due, and use your sharp pencil because we only got so much money. And that's all very important information. But I think that moving forward in those forums, there needs to be a more time spent on having those very discussions, and having them in a true collaborative sense, not having where the industry comes in and goes, we don't like the way you do your CPARS ratings, and here's how we think you should do them. Because the first thing the government's like, oh, hold on now. But sitting down and just taking the question you ask and say, how do we really work this better together? And then really calling out all of those examples where that works. As the government, unfortunately, because of some legal opinions and whatnot, we're not able to put as big a spotlight on, hey, Lunacon did that really great job on this project, and hey, we were going to give you a nice pretty plaque for it or whatever. But there's a ton of venues out there where projects are recognized, right? And if in those recognitions, while yes, Lunacon was the group out there that was doing the construction, right? And here's my guys that put the pipe in or whatever, but expanding that conversation to say, hey, and part of the reason we were able to build this project so well is our government partners who talked to us after hours, who helped us understand this, but really acknowledging each other's role in it being a team delivery. That's one of those things that's not going to turn things up overnight, but it's part of that building that culture, right? And building that culture of trust, and building that culture of, hey, sometimes things go sideways. So how, what are the 10 commandments of things that we're going to do or not going to do when things go sideways, so that we don't end up in screaming matches and letter writing campaigns and those sorts of things. But I also think that's some on the government too, of, hey, sometimes contractors are going to put in a claim. It doesn't necessarily mean we did anything wrong. Doesn't mean they did anything wrong. They're going through and executing and saying, hey man, from our perspective, this didn't go exactly right, and we'd like to talk about it. And not having the government's first reaction to a claim or a request for equitable adjustment or whatever to be, oh no, look, you bid it, you bought it, right? Now, in some cases, you bid it, you bought it. But being able to have that conversation and have it in a collaborative manner and not an adversarial one, I think would also help.
Absolutely.
I also think something that would help the industry is, let's see how to say this succinctly, is that for more contractors to understand that they can't be the be all and do all of every single piece of work out there. And I'm very, very in tune with your business, and you got to go get work to stay in business. And I understand that, but really knowing like what is your, what
Niche.
is your lane. And you
What
can,
is your
we
niche?
all bump outside our lane here and there, but if this is your lane here, way over there is not your lane. And being okay with that. And that doesn't mean you're a bad contractor. That doesn't mean that you don't like Charleston District because you never bid on the navigation features or whatever. But really understanding that, because I think we go through these time periods where there's so much work out there and everybody sees so much of it and they're like, oh, well, we can just go do all of this because they need contractors. We need contractors, but we need people who can do the thing.
Execute.
And if it's a new lane you want to get into, work with somebody who's already in that lane so you can figure it out before you try one by yourself.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think is
I
something else
agree
that
with
could
you.
really help.
Uh, when you talk, I've been talking about that, putting content out there, how important it is to understand what is that you're good at, your niche, your competitive advantage. Because diversification can cost money to the split, being not mastering anything can be, you're not efficient. You're not going to maximize your ability to generate profit because you're split and you're not good at anything, I guess, or a master of none. But when you're talking, I also hear, because I've asked myself this question many times, how do we elevate this industry? How do we elevate my company? How do I elevate myself as a leader? And so my company can elevate, and how do I elevate the industry? And of course, I cannot control what everybody does. I can only control maybe what I can do. But how do I influence? And I believe that a big obstacle that we all have is our own emotions. When we allow the emotions to play a role, the ego and fear, I think is fear and control, right, are probably the worst, and significance, wanting to be the hero of the story. When we allow significance to be the driving force, and uncertainty, control, and it's very difficult to remove yourself from the problem to actually add value to the solution. And so I noticed not so much, especially at the public level here, at the local level, government level, when it's very politicized. Sometimes there's entities that are very politicized. People are afraid to lose their jobs over a decision, and decisions take forever. And so that, I believe, probably is one of the things that cause more problems and more delays on jobs, not being able to make a decision because you're afraid, or because you don't want to be the one at fault, or because you're very used to blaming somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just part of who you are. It's your culture. And so how do we, I guess it could be more complex than we can discuss, you and I here. But how do you deal with, and you're in a job and you're a small company and a solution has to be made, yet you find that there's no progress? And Lisa, I have been in projects that we have waited 2 years for an RFI to be answered. Nobody wants to take the responsibility. And guess what? The contractor is put in a position where they have the responsibility to prove, which is very expensive and unfair, by the way. So how do we, I don't know, give me an idea. I'm going to do that forum.
I think you bring up something that is a challenge. I mean, not just in the construction arena or in this example, but people's unwillingness to make decisions I mean, we run into it all the time. I ran into it a lot in my job. And, it's one of those things that it depends on where's the decision hung up, and whatever is, how can you go and like poke somebody, every 3 days? Hey, I'm waiting on this. Hey, I'm waiting on this. Um, you know, th- Things that I found effective, and it's different than, for example, when you all do an RFI. That's a very different case. But I would always say, here are the three. Here are the three options. Here are the pros and cons. And a lot of times, if you can put a dollar figure with it, for every day I have to wait after X day, it's going to cost Y dollars. And a lot of times that I had to do that to try to move the needle. But sometimes it wouldn't move the needle because, anything that was in the beltway was so above my pay grade, all I could do is pester about it. Right. Or the end user would call and pester about it. And sometimes that would work. Right. But it's, yes, people, and that, to me, that's a definition of, good leaders versus not so good leaders, is you have to be willing to make a decision, and you stand by your decision. And, that doesn't mean that good leaders always make great decisions, right? Oh my God, I probably made a bad decision at least once a month, and then I'd have to go and clean up after. But I took the information, I consulted with people, and I made a decision, and we moved forward. And then I think that's the other thing, is a lot of times people get in their own heads that every decision you make is now in concrete and you can't ever change it. It's actually the opposite of that. Most decisions you make, you can at least modify after you've made them, because you go to implement it and you go, well, crap, nobody saw that coming. So, all right, no, we're not going to paint it blue. We're going to paint it, yellow or whatever. And just for leaders and decision makers to be aware that not making a decision is more impactful a lot of times than making a bad decision. But I think, again, it's those frank conversations, and I think it's a frank conversation that has to happen between the industry and government, and government being not just the Corps, but anybody in the government that hires private uh, contractors. That's a discussion that has to be made, or has to be had. Again, I don't think it's something that's going to change overnight. Something else I think could help is, we talked about knowing who's doing something well and talking about that. I think within the industry, you guys giving praise to each other. You'll see it a little bit more in some of the core districts. I spent a lot of time talking to the sister districts that helped us out with different things, and making sure that, like, on our social media, if something good happens in the Caribbean district, we make sure and we share that good news too. Or when Wilmington district completes the barracks project, we make sure and we give them a shout out, or we make sure that in the different venues that we try to elevate each other. And I think in the industry, I think some companies are good at that, but I think a majority still see everything as a very us them thing. And so, if you say, oh, hey, Ames did great at this project, well, why are you saying that? We could have done that project. Well, we didn't bid on that project. There's a lot wrapped up in that. And so I think it's lots of little things. I don't know that there's like a great silver bullet that's just all of a sudden gonna, raise the industry to the next level. I think it's a lot of people doing a lot of little things.
Well, it starts with you. Everything starts with us. So the only thing, the responsibility we have is towards what can I do? And if you feel that the world can be different, then you start with yourself. You be the change that you want to see in the world.
Yep. Clean your sidewalk first.
Yeah. And that's a great advice. So you watch. I'll start doing that. I can't say that I haven't done it. What I don't do is prevent myself from criticizing a competition. And actually, I've trained my mind to feel happy for when they get a job and I don't get it, when they are finishing a job and I don't get it. I think it's part of being an abundance mindset. Because the only person that cannot praise another human is one that is lack and thinks that everything should be for them. And it's not a mindset that I want to have at all. So that's a decision as well. So we're almost finishing, but Lisa, we're gonna have to do another one. I'm having too much fun with you.
Anytime.
So I have here that the next generation of women, what can you recommend to the next generation of women, younger women that are thinking about the construction industry? What would you recommend?
Oh, wow. So many things. So I think probably the first thing I would recommend is if this is the industry that you're interested in, but you're not sure what part you want to play in the industry, that's okay. Just get into the industry, because that's how you learn about all the pieces and parts. I mean, that's how I learned all the things about the Corps of Engineers. Was I started off being an economist, and then just, learned and soaked up everything I could about all the different things the Corps did, even if it wasn't something my district did. So I think that's my first thing, is if you're interested in the industry, just get into the industry, and then you can work on finding your seat in the industry. I think the second thing that I would say is the construction industry works best when it has good problem solvers and good collaborators. And typically women tend to be better collaborators. And so this is a skill that you're going to bring to the industry that's necessary. So don't be afraid to use it. You're sitting in a meeting and everybody's, at different points, and you've got the skills to say, well, hey guys, what if we all, we take a little of your idea and a little of your idea and we put them together, and what if we did that? Don't be afraid to do that, because just because nobody else at the table is showing collaboration doesn't mean that you can't bring it to the fold. And so it is a skill that is very much needed in the industry. And so when that's your skill, bring it and wield that thing like a sword every day. I think the third thing is to look for a couple good mentors, and I would say in the industry and in people who work with the industry. And I have a good female mentor, have a good male mentor, have somebody that works in the government sector to talk about, help you with things there, and anybody in the industry that's in an area you're interested in. Find those people, ask them questions, ask them, some of the things you and I talked about here today, ask them some of those questions. And then probably the last thing is to be very open-minded and flexible, because, just as we're seeing the things that AI is doing to change lots of different areas, technology in general is changing quickly. If you are able to switch and adapt and kind of flow with all the changes, and be able to see where those changes might be able to take you, or to take the company or the agency that you work for, really be open and flexible to those, and be able to flow with that. And I think with that, and then just don't be afraid to mess up. We all, especially early in our career, we all did dumb things, or we all did things and like, oh, that's not what I thought would happen if I did that. But that's how we learn. Failure is how we learn. Do we learn from textbooks? Do we learn from other things? Absolutely. But sometimes the most effective lessons we've learned is from, when we touch the hot stove and we shouldn't have. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid of that. Don't think that because, oh, well, it's the construction industry, so as a female, I can't fail because they'll boot me out of it. No, everybody in the construction industry has failed more than once. So don't be afraid of that. And yeah, that would be my biggest pieces of advice.
Yeah. Failure is learning. Sometimes it costs a lot of money. So you have to pray that you make enough that you can pay for it. But
Yep.
we
Or that you find a way to fix it.
and yes, and if we learn fast, and create a process around it, it probably won't happen again. So a lot of good nuggets, definitely mentors. And the last question I have, and it's not because I cannot ask more questions, but I really want to leave a second part. We're going to do a second part.
Okay.
If you look at your journey, your whole journey, especially now that you have been able to kind of rest and look at your life from a little bit of a distance, you're not in it. What are you most grateful for in your professional career?
What am I most grateful for? Wow. I think I'm probably most grateful for the people that I got to work with during that entire 32 years. And different ones for different reasons, but overall the people I got to work with, they were, learned so much from so many people. I got to see real, experts in their field, a David Dodds, for example, getting to work with David Dodds and learn as much about construction as I could from someone like David. I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for the things I learned from different communities working on these projects. I'm a bit of a travel junkie, but getting to work in some of these communities and learn about the history and the people that live there, I'm very grateful to have been able to do that. And so I'd say the people are what I'm most grateful for. And I think, my as I think about it, what I would hope that most people think about when they think about me or think about my time at the Corps is that I help them in some way, in their life, whether that's I was the project manager on a project that brought them clean drinking water, or I helped somebody discover what their true passion was and help them in their career, or whether it was just being there for an employee who had lost a loved one or something. That's what I hope people remember, is that I was someone who helped them with something in their life.
Well, I said it was the last one, but what's in the future for you and what's exciting?
So a lot of travel in my future. Actually, we're taking a family trip to the Baltics this summer, so I'm really excited about that. Getting to my nephew's going to be graduating college next May, and so getting to help him get into his career, I'm really excited about that. And I'm toying, haven't decided yet, but I'm toying with the idea of doing my own little side business of doing leadership development, and coming out and doing things like this and having talks, or meeting with leaders, either future leaders or current leaders, and talking about leadership and how do we all do it better, and what are some of the things we want to avoid. So that's over there. And then of course, I've been trying to make progress on my to be read pile of books, which I have, but I read 3 and then I go buy 5, so the pile hasn't gotten much smaller, but I've read a lot, so that's kind of what's out there. That's what's exciting for me, and every day's a new adventure, and we'll see what's next.
Awesome. Well, that reminds me to send you the books that I have to put in your pile.
Absolutely.
Lisa, I've always admired you, and I've always been very grateful for the leader that you are. You're definitely a servant leader, super kind heart, truthful heart, honest, loving, but still firm. You're able to communicate with clarity, with love, but you say what needs to be said. Say yes when it's supposed to be yes, and no when it's supposed to be no. And you do it with so much grace. So I am so grateful for you. Thank you for the impact that you've had in my life, in Lunacon's Construction's life, and the impact that you've had for the construction industry. I think a lot is going to be written about you. More to come.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your very kind words. Like I said, I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us in this insightful conversation with Lisa Metheney. Her career reminds us that the projects we build are only part of the story. The leadership, collaboration, and purpose behind these projects, the projects we build, are what truly shape communities and the future of our industry. If this episode sparked something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others in the construction and leadership space. We'll see you next time on Thriving in Construction, the podcast. Let's keep thriving together.